Welcome to The Jury's Still Out, a show highlighting and discussing all things having to do with law, trials, and juries. Your host is Mary Griffiths, a litigation consulting expert who has overseen thousands of cases in state and federal courts, and is a jury correspondent to discuss trial matters and media strategy as it pertains to jury selection and courtroom performance. This is The Jury's Still Out.
Hi, welcome back to The Jury's Still Out, where we talk about all things law, trials, and juries. I'm very excited to dig deep into this next topic, which is aviation law, with my guest, Ladd Sanger from Slack, Davis & Sanger. Not only is he an aviation lawyer, but he's also a certified pilot, both in planes and helicopters. Please welcome to the show, Ladd Sanger.
Thanks, Mary.
It's great to have you here.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I know it's been way too long. I know that from what happened last month, and could you imagine if you were sitting in your home and all of a sudden, if you're in Colorado, Denver specifically, and an engine or parts of an engine fall from the sky, what in the world you could be thinking? So let's talk about what happened last month with the United, flight that had some engine issues. I believe it was leaving for Honolulu, and then it had to come back to Denver. I understand that they may still be doing engine autopsies for this, but how does something like that occur?
Well, what is really telling about the Colorado case is it wasn't the first one, and that is problematic. So the Boeing 777 has a number of different engine options, and these Pratt & Whitney 4000 series engines have had a problem with uncontained engine failures in flight. In fact, the Colorado to Honolulu one was the second one in just a few months. In just the December preceding, last December, there was another flight that had an uncontained engine failure. And before that, there were at least one, probably more. So this engine has had kind of a storied history, frankly, and the NTSB had forced some changes to the inspection protocol. Pratt & Whitney, the manufacturer of the engine, was cited by the NTSB for improper instructions and improper oversight of the mechanics inspecting these blades. And the bottom line of what happens is these blades are moving at very high speed inside the engine. And they're subjected to extreme heat and cooling every time that there is a cycle or a startup and shutdown of the engine. Right. And over time, that results in metal fatigue. Just think of bending a paper clip. You can bend it a couple times and it's not going to break. You bend it a whole bunch of times, ultimately it breaks. And so these engines have been in service for, quite a while, and we haven't had a robust enough inspection program. And when you have these engines that age and the inspection program is not adequate, and you start having these failures that where the blade comes loose, it comes loose with a tremendous amount of force. Now, the issue is the engine is supposed to be designed to keep those particles and parts from flying out of the engine. And when it doesn't, that's a problem. Yeah. We know that from Southwest 1380. That was the one where the fan blade came off and that penetrated the cabin and the lady was sucked out of the aircraft. So catastrophic engine failures are a huge problem. Right. And they, by certification standards, should never happen. The fact that we have had multiple of them in the past few years is frankly scary from an aviation safety standpoint and from a passenger standpoint for those that are flying on these airplanes.
Well, and also from a general public standpoint, you talked about not enough of a robust sort of certification process. What do you mean by that?
So certification is a buzzword. We know that with the Boeing 737 MAX, there's a certification problem with the FAA. Because, frankly, Boeing even admitted it. They basically defrauded the FAA when they certified the 737 MAX. They intentionally withheld information. The Department of Justice figured that out, and Boeing paid $2.5 billion to have those charges dropped. So
B with a billion?
With a billion.
Yes.
Yes, there is a problem with certification, and it boils down to this. Airplanes have gotten so complex, and the system's so complex, the FAA does not have the staffing and the expertise to themselves vet and certify aircraft.
Well, and you had written an article about this because I think not a lot of people may understand this, is that the manufacturers for the product are actually a huge part. They're sort of stamping that their product is safe. Is that right? Like they put on from the FAA, they're putting on that hat that, hey, here's our product and here's why our product is safe, which sort of begs the question, is that really, are they going to not say that their product is safe?
Well, kind of like the fox guarding the hen house.
Right.
The problem is there's really no other economically feasible solution. From a staffing standpoint and an economic standpoint, it would be virtually impossible for the FAA to hire the people with the requisite expertise to be able to review all these designs and approve them in a timely manner. So we're going to have to continue to rely on the delegated authority, which basically is the manufacturer has somebody in their organization that takes off their manufacturer hat and puts on their FAA hat and signs off and says that the product is airworthy and safe. But it relies on trust and integrity. And in the case of the Boeing 737 MAX and some other aircraft by other very prominent manufacturers, that trust has been lost. And they have gamed the system. And that has compromised aviation safety. We've seen that with the MAX, we've seen that with some helicopters, and we've seen that with some general aviation aircraft. So what is going to happen is there has to be severe penalties for the manufacturers when they don't fully disclose. And one of the things that keeps them in check, frankly, is the civil justice system. We've heard the chairman of the NTSB say that the civil justice system is an integral part of aviation safety because there are penalties associated with making aircraft in a manner that crash, in a defective and unreasonably dangerous manner.
So the Boeing came back, the 737 MAX, it came back November of 2020, right?
FAA rescinded the grounding order in November of 2020, the Europeans in January of 2021. But the 737 MAX legal debacle is quite interesting, and it'll probably be something that lawyers in aviation law from now on will look at because it spawned so much litigation in so many different areas, and it's probably unprecedented on some of the things that we have seen. For example, there's been one judge that found that Boeing used the crime fraud exception to eliminate the attorney-client privilege between Boeing and its lawyers, allowing some of that attorney-client communications to become discoverable.
Wow.
Which is unheard
Never
of.
a good thing, right? Never a good thing.
Terrible if you're Boeing, but unheard of in aviation litigation. We have seen lawsuits over the grounding by the airlines because their new expensive airplanes aren't flying. We've seen lawsuits by pilots because they're not able to fly. We've seen lawsuits between subcomponent manufacturers and Boeing. Obviously, the wrongful death claims. So there are so many different pieces of litigation that have come out of that. It has also driven the aviation insurance industry into a very difficult, hard market. And because of the billions of dollars that have been claimed, and it's not just the wrongful death claims, it is the grounding claims. There's so many other aspects that have been expensive for the insurance industry. It has caused a contraction in the insurance industry, which has driven up rates throughout the industry for whether it's a guy like me with my airplane, whether it's airlines, whether it's product manufacturers. Rates in aviation have gone up. It's a very hard market. Insurers have left the market completely. So it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. The litigation involving MAX is going to continue to evolve. It's going to be with us for years. And it's going to create some new law in areas that have been kind of quiet for a while.
Right. The ripple effect will last a long, long time.
And then the competitive landscape, I mean, Boeing is a huge exporter of U.S. goods. They've only got one real competitor, Airbus. So it's not just a company versus company. It's a country versus country. There is so much that's going to follow on from this. And, you know, the technology, the regulatory oversight.
It's going to be a long, long time. It's going to be good for your business. I'll put it to you that way.
It's good for the aviation litigation industry.
Yes.
one of my proudest moments as an aviation lawyer is getting a prominent helicopter manufacturer to change the design of their fuel system. It was only as a result of litigation that I had against that manufacturer that, as part of a settlement, they agreed to install a crash-worthy fuel system, because we were seeing time and time again in otherwise survivable crashes, people burning alive in these helicopters.
Right.
And I mean, if I look back at my career so far, that is a big achievement.
Sure. But I guess, like, from a jury level, whenever we do sort of research on these cases, you just stated the alternative is that these manufacturers do know their products better than anyone, really. I mean, because they're in there. So what would be the alternative? I mean, their education level on how the product works has to be pretty high. I just don't understand how we're going to get out of this sort of fix of, if the hen's watching or the fox is watching the hen house, as you say. I don't know what the fix is for this besides what you're saying with the civil lawsuits. But they do know their products well. So it's kind of like the safety protocols are there. How could this be fixed?
Has to be fixed a couple ways. One, civil justice system is an important part of it. Two, the regulators have to impose penalties. It was too cozy of a relationship between the oversight with the FAA and the manufacturers. These people saw one another on a daily basis. They got to know one another. They became friends. And that cozy relationship allowed things like 737 MAX to occur.
Right.
And there have to be penalties. I mean, Boeing paying on the DOJ penalty. There have to be penalties when manufacturer misconduct is found. And then public pressure, frankly, is when it comes to light. But unless it's a 737 or something big, you don't get the public scrutiny on the smaller general aviation aircraft. So I think that's a problem. But the FAA is going to have to impose stronger penalties when they catch the manufacturers not disclosing information, misleading with information. And the civil justice system is a big part of helping contribute to that.
Right. Well, and since we're just now coming out, it's March 2021, we're just now kind of, and I hate the phrase new normal, but we're getting to travel more. Have you seen any sort of trends in your particular expertise since, I'd say, fourth quarter of last year till now? Has there been any new developments?
Well, obviously, the aviation industry has been decimated. The commercial aviation industry, the airlines, it's beyond any depression that they could have ever imagined. Traffic down 90+%.
Wow.
And we would not have an airline system today if it weren't for the federal money that was put into the airline system. From a private aviation standpoint, the pandemic has been good. It's manufacturers were selling more airplanes last year because people wanted to avoid putting themselves at risk with a whole bunch of other people. They wanted to control their environment, be on an airplane by themselves. So that has been good. The charter companies, the fractional ownership companies have seen upticks in business from first-time customers that they didn't have before. You've always had some businesses, high net worth individuals, utilizing private aviation, but it has been more democratized through the fractional ownership programs, the jet card programs, and people, large families, even smaller corporations have been taking advantage of private aviation the past year to control the environment that they're exposed to when they're traveling.
Right. Well, and there's been a big development. We were talking about this before the show started. Huge Supreme Court case came down yesterday. Can you tell us sort of how this is going to impact hugely this particular industry? So,
personal jurisdiction has been a disaster the past few years for parties on both sides, and the insurance companies. If I get with my defense lawyer colleagues, my insurance colleagues, they're telling me that we're spending inordinate amounts of time and resources fighting over where the case can be brought, personal jurisdiction. And it all follows from the Daimler case, the Supreme Court Daimler case a few years ago. And then yesterday, the Ford versus Montana case came down. It was handed down by the Supreme Court. It was an 8-0 decision. And it basically says that if you manufacture a product and you distribute that product nationwide and you intentionally serve a market, and even if you don't send that vehicle to that market, and it ultimately ends up there, and a defect in that product causes injury to a resident of a state, and that event occurs in the state, that the manufacturer is going to be subject to jurisdiction in that state. And one of the opinions said it's not fair for the manufacturer to come in the front door with their advertising material and sales material and run out the back door when the process server shows up. So I think that Ford is going to give a lot of clarity on a lot of mischief that has been going on in the aviation and, frankly, all products liability cases. But given the transitory nature of aviation, because we have products fly aircraft in multiple jurisdictions, it's been super hard on us. And so we've had a lot of claim splitting where we get one defendant in this state, another defendant in this state. The discovery's not coordinated. There's different rules on depositions, discovery, res judicata, collateral estoppel issues. So hopefully with Ford, we're going to go back to an environment that is more predictable like it was before Daimler.
So Vlad, let's talk about drones and drones' impact on the aviation industry. I mean, I know that you being a pilot, I'm sure have some sort of war stories about this, but it just seems like everywhere we look, people are just shooting up drones. This must be problematic for pilots and for just regulatory reasons.
It is a problem. I've had personal experience with, right out this window, coming into the Addison airport and having drones in the flight path because people don't realize where airplanes are. And there's hobbyists, there's real estate people trying to use them, but there are new regulations that are coming out, and drones are going to have, especially the drones that are of any significant size, are going to have to be broadcasting out their location and information so that it can be received into airplanes like mine that can say, there's traffic here, and that the ATC system can see them, and also where the operator is. And I think you're going to see law enforcement then cracking down on people that are putting these drones into airspace where they shouldn't be, because there have been drone aircraft collisions, and some of these drones are big enough that they can cause serious damage. So we do need to get a handle on that, and there's the regulators are. The drones got ahead of the regulators, and now the regulators are catching up. But if you're a drone operator, you need to use some common sense, because it can really be a life-saving situation. Don't be flying those things around a busy metropolitan area where there's aircraft flying around.
And if you're just 12 years old and you think it's really cool and I'm going to fly my drone, maybe get some parental oversight on some of this stuff, just because of how it could have such a huge impact on the planes and helicopters flying above.
It sure could. This airspace around the area where we are here in North Dallas right now, you've got Love Field, you've got DFW, you've got Addison, you've got the hospitals where the EMS helicopters are flying, you've got the police helicopters, and a drone this big can cause some serious damage if it comes into contact with an aircraft. And when you're flying up there, those things, I'll tell you from firsthand experience, are virtually impossible to see.
Wow. You had talked about earlier the helicopter story and having an engine sort of change because of litigation. Being a pilot, how has this helped you in being a trial lawyer? How has that expertise sort of impacted your litigation mindset?
Well, I think that it is a huge benefit, but it comes with some cost. And here's how I see it. I am a pilot. I operate my own airplanes. I've been flying for I don't know how many years, probably almost 30 years, and have experienced a lot of things. I've had in-flight engine problems. I've had avionics problems.
So scary,
had, the flashing red light, getting the checklist out.
Oh my gosh.
And so from a pilot standpoint, when you're trying to convey these events to the jury, it helps to have been there to understand that you're not in a vacuum. And I think that's one of the things that helps me over some of the defense lawyers on the other side that haven't been in those situations. It's not just a sterile environment where you can sit back with 20/20 hindsight and say, well, this is what somebody should have done, because there's a whole lot going on. And when the big red light is flashing in your face and you're in the clouds and you can't see anything and you're trying to get the checklist out and you start getting cascading CAS messages, it is it's an intense environment.
Right. The blood pressure medication's being taken at exactly that moment. Yes.
Right. But being able to have been in those environments, I think, helps me convey that situation to the jury. And, frankly, I may be on the other side of it. I may be the guy Monday morning quarterbacking saying the pilot should have done these other things, but it gives me perspective. Now, the shortcoming and difficulty that I have, which is why I count on my staff and consultants to help me from stepping into problems here, is I can be over technical and I can not see the perspective of someone who doesn't have much of an aviation background.
Right.
And whether that be in legal briefing, whether that be in a trial, or whether that is in a hearing, I need to have someone that brings me back to the lay common person without an aviation background to give me perspective on what is important, what is confusing, and what is clear.
Right. So you have the emotionality of you've been there, done that, you've actually been in the cockpit where stuff is blowing up, but the details, the minutia can weigh you down. Do you see, having litigated in this area for such a long time, do you see that there's particular issues that from a juror level, you see continuously that they may have a little bit of a harder time understanding when it comes to this particular type of litigation?
There are. Airplanes are sophisticated. Today's airplanes, the avionics are computers that drive the airplane, and there's multiple computers with incredible amounts of software that is in there that controls the airplane. And then you interface that with complex aircraft systems and complex engines. It's hyper-technical. Even for a pilot who I get trained specifically on one of my airplanes at least once a year, and usually twice a year, where I'm actually in a simulator and it goes on for days. And, I know these systems as inside and out, but you still don't appreciate the technicality of the interrelated systems. And that is a problem when you're trying to convey this to a jury. And it's a problem for both sides, because those of us that practice in this field can we can get too far down the road in the technical minutia. Right. And one of the things that I do is use focus groups to help me understand what jurors understand and what they don't understand. And we have to remember that this is an educational process. So we need to spend some time with them talking about that the hip bone is connected to the leg bone before we get into the specific details. Right.
It's like, it reminds me of the Schoolhouse Rock. When we were, younger, we'd learn, well, how does something become a bill? It goes down this. Do you think, I agree with you, because it's kind of like intellectual property cases. Sometimes lawyers get so sucked into the technology and they love it so much because they've lived it, they forget that the audience that they're speaking to has not lived that, nor wants to live that per se. But most of the jurors that I've talked to, they've been on airplanes, they've experienced stuff firsthand as far as flying, but they just don't necessarily understand, nor maybe want to understand, the technology part of it. Have you noticed over your course of litigating that the technology, has it gotten better? Or is it one of those things where sometimes the old technology for planes or helicopters is actually preferred?
I have to say, and I'm dating myself as a lawyer because back when I started, we still had fax machines.
Right. Right.
And airplanes, since I soloed when I was 16 years old, have changed. I mean, the interface between the aircraft and me is totally different today than when I started flying. It's now flat panel displays. I don't have a single analog instrument in one of my airplanes. Everything is a digital display. And that is different. It gives an incredible amount of situational awareness. I think it makes aviation safety dramatically better if you know how to use the technology. And when I look at airplanes that have accidents, I look at stuff that's 1950s technology and 1950s design that was designed with a slide rule. And because of the certification standards, the manufacturers haven't wanted to update it. And there's a protection for manufacturers called the General Aviation Revitalization Act. It's an 18-year statute of repose. Manufacturers want to take advantage of that, and they don't want to update their products because it would subject them to liability where otherwise they may not have liability. And so that plus the cost of certification has been a real impediment to technology making it into aviation. So I would say on balance, technology has made aviation safer. There are new things that are coming out every day that is, what we call George or the autopilot or the system helping co-pilot the airplane and prevent accidents. Now, that said, I think we've also seen problems where technology is too much. And a couple examples, we've seen Airbuses that have flown into the ground because the fly-by-wire system didn't allow the pilot to fly the airplane. The maneuvering characteristics system on the 737 MAX, which took over because it thought that the airplane's angle of attack was too high and pushed the nose over when really it was a defective sensor, it caused 2 crashes. So there's some pro and there's some con, but on balance, technology has made aviation safer. And the newer generation of airplanes are safer and better than the stuff that was even around when I soloed and when I started practicing law.
Wow. So I take it you've done plenty of Zoom depositions during this past year. Are you looking forward to actually getting back into the courtroom and looking at jurors face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and kind of having that vibe again of being in the courtroom?
Yes, I am. But
Zoom fatigue is real. It really is.
I will say that before the pandemic, I spent so much time running, because my cases are all over the country, and even the world. And I spent so much time on an airplane for a 20-minute hearing to, fly for a day, be there for a day, fly for a day for 20 minutes. To be able to do that by Zoom is tremendously efficient and has been a boon to my personal life. From the bigger trial standpoint, I don't see how you can try an aviation case over Zoom. And I have to do inspections in person. There's no substitute for that. And I think some of the technical depositions that we have to take require it to be in person. And I think on the plaintiff side, I'm not alone. I think the defense side agrees that an expert witness in an aviation case is just really not subject to a Zoom deposition. Too many documents, too much technical information, and you need to be able to read that body language. That's the thing I miss the most.
Right. For sure. I mean, otherwise, sometimes there are still some lawyers that I've talked to and deal with that you get the cat eye, they're not exactly full in frame, and you're just like, this is such a March 2020 issue. What are we doing? I think most trial lawyers like yourself, I think we're all longing to kind of get back in the courtroom.
In the aviation bar, frankly, we have some good camaraderie. It's a small bar. We pretty much all know one another. And I want to get back to seeing some of my friends, frankly. I mean, I have friends, I'm experts on the other side, defense lawyers, and I do enjoy some of that camaraderie. To the deposition point, we have seen some shenanigans going on with the depositions where the coaching is going on because they've set up another screen there. So there are definitely some downsides to doing Zoom depositions.
Yes, for sure. And that's like almost a whole other show of, the tactics that sort of are an undercurrent of what's going on. But Lad, thank you so much for coming in and especially talking about the latest with the Supreme Court and what's happening with that. I really appreciate it. If you want to hear more about Lad or see more about him, we're going to put his links at the bottom of this page. But thank you so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again.
Thanks for watching The Jury's Still Out. To learn more about Mary Griffiths or our guests today, check the description below. Don't forget, we'll be here every other week of the month with more incredible trial stories.